Hello, my name is Bryn Lawrence, and you're watching China Freedom File. Authorities raided the residence of Xinguang Church members this week, bringing with them demolition materials and ruining an ongoing renovation that had been taking place. This marks the third time that Xinguang Church has been attacked by officials this year. In addition, a representative of a state-run church in China has sued the officials for the first time in history. The representative, Wang Ruiqun, is from Donghu Church, a church that has been recently targeted by the authorities. She hired a lawyer to help her file an administrative lawsuit against the officials in hopes that it would help curb the persecution happening against Christians in China. In addition, a Catholic bishop has been feared dead after being missing for 17 years. China recently pressured the Vatican to replace this bishop with his assistant, Francis An Shuxing. The bishop who is feared dead, his name is James Su Zhimin, and he was arrested in the late 90s for refusing to join the Catholic state-run church association. In 2003, he was last seen in a hospital, and since then, he has been missing. The U.S. government just this week gave the Houston Chinese Consulate 72 hours to close after concerns arose that it was being used to steal American intellectual information. These concerns come just after 2 Chinese hackers were indicted for stealing information and for possibly meddling in America's attempts to develop a vaccine for COVID-19 and also a treatment for COVID-19. My name is Bryn Lawrence, and this has been China Freedom File.
Welcome back to China Freedom File. Thank you, Bryn, for giving us the update about the latest persecution against Protestant Christians of Xinguang Church in Xiamen City, Fujian Province, and also the missing bishop. And of course, the biggest story in the month of July, I should say in 40 some years, I think, is the forced closure of the Chinese Communist Party's consulate in Houston, because as Senator Rubio and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Democrat Senator Mark Warner, stated after this order by the U.S. State Department that the Chinese consulate in Houston is really not a real diplomatic post at all. It is a spy center. It is an espionage center. It is Chinese Communist Party's vehicle, mechanism to threaten even American citizens, and it is a hub of stealing American high technology and many other things. So today I really want to focus on this episode, and first of all, why Houston Consulate? The Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas, is targeted. There are quite some things, some are astonishing things, had been happening in that compound, and some even criminal activities related even to our Ministry of ChinaAid over the years. As we are based in Texas, we're headquartered here since 2004. and the FBI had investigating the Chinese consulate in Houston for at least over 10 years for their criminal activities. And I just want to list the significance of this move by President Trump and his administration. I mean, to the established diplomatic circles or China experts, this is one of the most consequential, if not the most consequential action taken by the U.S. government on the U.S.-China relations since the two countries reestablished its diplomatic relations in 1979. For one thing, the Houston consulate was one of the first consulates next to the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. That established in 1979 after then senior leader, Chinese military strongman Deng Xiaoping visited the U.S. and had a summit with President Jimmy Carter in January 1979, and he was basically also visiting Texas and the city of Houston, and it caused a real kind of public relations kind of fame, kind of a fanfare, and Deng Xiaoping was shown, was receiving so much publicity for his image that he tried successfully at the time and projecting and opening China to America, and even wearing a very big cowboy hat and kind of talking to U.S. diplomats, to the American citizens. I mean, remember that the 1979 Chinese leaders' visit was the first one since the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Of course, from 1966 to 1976, much or all of China was pretty much shut down to the outside world, and the Chairman Mao was basically using the Red Guards, causing just the destruction, chaos, cultural cancel culture, and beating up all the intellectuals and sending anyone who had a foreign connection to the countryside for re-education through labor. And millions of Chinese citizens were just murdered and killed. Some were right up on the stage of the so-called public criticism campaign by the Red Guards. I mean, some radical Red Guards. They even beaten up their own teachers, principals of their schools, and even families beat up their own relatives. You have daughters beat up their father, some beat up their mother, and right on the stage. And actually, even the Chinese President Xi Jinping, the current kind of emperor of China, was famously kind of had his time be expelled from Beijing when his father, Mr. Xi Zhongxun, who was one of Chairman Mao's actually old buddies during the revolution time, and their battle time against Kuomintang, the KMT, the Chinese Nationalist Party. And he was sent to the countryside because his father was sidelined by Chairman Mao and was even detained. And some of the red kind of descendants of the Communist Party leader Chairman Mao's old buddies. They were turned on to be Red Guards, and one of the kind of princelings, they called it princelings. So one of the children, the sons of another Chinese early Communist Party leader called Bo Yibo. His son, one of his sons called Bo Xilei. I mean, he was famously kind of struggled, criticized, and even beat up his own father during the public criticism campaign on the stage, to the point his father, the Communist Party general Bo Yibo, several of his ribs were broken. Can you imagine? I mean, so your own son or daughter beat up, you and on the public stage, and there was a famous quotation kind of about that story. Instead of feeling pain or pushback against his son, this Communist Party general, Chairman Mao's old comrade, Bo Yibo, actually think very highly of his son, Bo Xilei, for his loyalty to Chairman Mao, to the Great Revolution, and for his bravery, decisiveness by standing with Chairman Mao. And that gave him a major positive impression of this great son, that he was quotedly or reportedly saying to other children, among all his children, and that that guy, Bo Xilei, has the real guts to become the red heirs, the successors of communism in China. And he's the only one has the real quality to be a politician in the Chinese Communist Party. And guess what? This guy was promoted and to the highest office among the Communist Party leadership, as one of the Politburo members of the Chinese Communist Party. One of the 15 ruling elites of Communist Party leaders. That's just before President Xi Jinping took power, of course, and he has the ambition, of course, to replace Xi Jinping. And there was basically internal party leadership struggle with Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping struck him hard, and so Bo Xilei ended up in prison now, and his wife was accused of murdering a British businessman, and many other crimes were exposed. So I just want to give you a little bit history of the Houston Consulate of the Chinese Communist Party. It was built in 1979, but over the years, that Chinese consulate compound in Houston had been fortified, had been consolidated, and had been used as a major hub for many criminal activities. I mean, we all know, those who are familiar on the history of diplomacy, of course, according to the kind of tradition, countries, I mean, including the U.S. and many other countries, when you establish the embassies or consulates in other countries, it was declared with some immunity and sovereignty of that piece of land. And the traditional way of intelligence gathering had been kind of always one of the functions. But it's one thing you gather intel about other countries' operation through their sources available, from their newspaper publication, from talking with citizens in the lawfully. But it's a totally different matter when you engage criminal activities of espionage, of kidnapping, of harassment and threatening, even threatening the citizens of where they are located. So that's exactly has been happening in this Chinese consulate in Houston. So on July 21st should be remembered as a very important milestone date for the turnaround relationship with U.S. and China. And I noticed a news report right after the State Department and U.S. government ordered the Chinese government to shut down their consulate in Houston within 72 hours. And the next day, on July 22nd, overnight actually, fire alarm was triggered, and the neighborhood of Chinese consulate compound reported that there major fires were, many happening inside the compound. It turned out from some surveillance video, showing the Chinese diplomats inside the compound apparently busy burning documents and many other things, and cause on the yard of the consulate. And there's a lot of documentation or papers, or who knows what are they burning, and caused a major smoke and fire. And this Houston fire truck, was called in, and the Chinese consulate refused them entry, and so they had to remotely put off the fire. And so just as soon as they received the order to shut down, then this fire occurred. And there's a very logical reasoning to know that the Chinese, these gangsters, these outlaws, buried in the name of diplomatic coverage, are busy removing, burning, destroying evidence of criminal activities. And since they were only given 72 hours, as from Thursday to Friday, by 5 o'clock on Friday, the order says every one of the Chinese workers and diplomats inside the consulate had to leave, go back to China, and otherwise they will face criminal prosecution. So we, of course, have heard already from the State Department spokesperson about the reasoning and the preliminary reporting shows. The primary reasoning, according to the official explanation by the U.S. government, is to protect the U.S. intellectual property to be stolen, again, and to protect American citizens, from being harassed and from protect the Americans' technology, further being kind of stolen. So I want to really give you some insider story. I think you're ready to know a little bit more than the official explanation. I know for a fact that some years ago, that according to credible, reliable witnesses, basically when two Chinese diplomats working inside the Chinese consulate in Houston, I was told is as a couple, as a man and woman from China. They were kidnapped and even bonded by the Chinese consulate officials just because they were deemed as disobedient officers from some kind of Beijing order, and they refused to leave, of course. And then the Chinese consulate officers basically incarcerated them by binding them with ropes and blindfolded and wrapped them up in a big bag under the basement. And then because they couldn't use the U.S. Domestic flights to transport them to Los Angeles, and so the Chinese consulate just threw them into the trunk of a big van and transported them overnight to Chinese consulate in Los Angeles compound. And then this poor couple were being detained in the dark room, in a secret room inside the Chinese Los Angeles consulate compound for a few days, and they were crying, they were kind of shouting. So many people had heard already in the Chinese consulate in Los Angeles, and then they were secretly packed and shipped as a diplomatic bag, and basically, and carried into the Chinese Communist Party controlled their own airlines. Perhaps the China International Airline from Los Angeles International Airport back to China. I mean, this is certainly criminal activities in the U.S. soil. You not only kidnap people, but also illegally transport them, illegally limit their freedom, and illegally basically harass them, and illegally transport two individuals, two human beings in such a form and back to China just because they were deemed as disobedient. And certainly I also know for sure that within our own organization, ChinaAid, as a Christian human rights organization based in Texas, over the years, a number of our employees, they're Chinese Americans, with American passports, and they were harassed, they were intimidated, they were even being questioned, interrogated inside that compound, inside the Chinese consulate compound in Houston. And one of our employees, I wouldn't name his name, he has a very aged father, I think over 80 years old, and one time when he traveled to Asia, he was just really making a transfer from the Beijing International Airport, right in the transfer area, in the international transfer area in Beijing Airport. He was kidnapped by the Chinese special agents from the MSS, Ministry of State Security, and then he was interrogated and for the whole 24 hours. And then his visa was revoked, and he was threatened. He will no longer able to get back to China unless he do something for China. And guess what? He was forced to go back to the Chinese consulate in Houston and made a confession and sign a pledge to support the Chinese government. And later on, of course, he had to resign from ChinaAid with a good conscience. He couldn't do that as a spy. And quite a few other of our staff who has American passports, and their American passports were confiscated when they went back to China to visit their family members. And I mean, they are harassed, they were interrogated, they were illegally threatened. So I want to let you know, so this action is totally justified. But we want you also to continue to pray that the Chinese citizens and American citizens, we should really be vigilant, alert, and also to stand firm for our fundamental freedoms or for our First Amendment's rights. And especially if those happening to you in the U.S. soil, and please report to FBI, report to the law enforcement, let them know so they have the evidence to indict these bad guys and to remove them from further endangering you and your families, and even you're not an American citizen. And if you're in the United States, the White House told me that anyone who are in the U.S. as a visitor, as a permanent resident, even if you're not an American citizen, the President Trump, that the American First policy actually applies to this kind of circumstances. Thank you so much, and let's continue to pray for the freedom and for the persecuted that Brian just mentioned, for those brothers and sisters who were roughed up, and that they can continue to stand strongly and firmly for the gospel. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention.
Order your copy of this program from the GLC bookstore by calling the numbers or visiting the website on your screen. Please include the program number when ordering.